Hi guys, we are continuing our journey through exploring chords and chord progressions, and I just want to remind you that we in the last video talked about the three components of a simple chord chart, and those are the time signature. Time signature again gives me the group of beats that will be repeated over and over. 4/4, I'm going to be repeating 4/4, the top number 4 over and over again. And measure lines, that's number 2. That tells me how long I'm going to play each group of 4. So if a G chord lasts for 4 measures, I'm going to play 16 beats of G. And the final component, what chord do I play? The chord name itself. So these are really important and a great shorthand, you could say, for getting people to play chord progressions along with you quickly, and for keeping maybe your ideas if you're songwriting or arranging songs, or even making a list of cover songs that you want to play. This is a simple way, and you can write lyrics in above the music. That's what she shows in chapter 7. But at the end of chapter 6, I didn't really get to that list of chart exercises, as she calls them. And this is kind of important because there's some material for the final performance exam that you could use here. For example, number 1 on this chart is a very playable chord progression. So for you beginning chord players, beginning guitar players in this class, I can use E minor to A minor and back to E minor again. I'll demonstrate the chord progression. It's in 4/4. There are 2 measures of each chord, and this would be something you could play at a very slow tempo, and it would be considered a usable chord progression for one of the examples on the final. There's 1 measure, 2, 3. Next measure, that's the A minor chord. And back to E minor. So my hands barely have to move in order to go between those 2 chords. And because there's 2 measures of each chord, I'm playing 8 beats of each chord. So that's a great one for the final exam, where I have an example that says choose your own chord progression. There's other examples I'll bring up as we start to talk about that final. But this is a great one, and a lot of players use it and have used it as an example that works without being too complicated. There's also another example on the final exam where I have picked the chord progression. Remember, I just said the other idea is you pick a chord progression. But if you're maybe a little more advanced, you can play the folio, maybe an intermediate player, or you want a little bit of a challenge. And that one's in 3/4 time, and I ask you to play that chord progression once through 3 strums per measure, and then to come up with your own strumming pattern that must stay in 3/4 time. So I'm going to give you just one example right now. Later on down the road, I will do it maybe in more detail, or discuss it in more detail. This is number 4 on page 45. It's called the folia. It's based on an old Spanish repetitive chord progression called the folia. And I'm going to do 3 strums per measure the first time, and then I will do a very simple dotted half note and let it ring for 3 beats each time. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. A minor, A minor, G. This is where I have to turn around and stretch a little bit more. G, C, G. A minor, E, and then dotted half. Notice I must stay in 3. I missed the chord there. Should have been G, 2, 3. C, G, A minor, and E. I'll do one more variation. make sure you stay in 3/4 if you're going to start to play the folia and do those variations, okay? So that's page 45. There's several chord progressions there. The folia is named on the review sheet for the final, which is in the back of your course schedule. And number 1 was the other example I talked about as being very usable for the final, where you get to choose your own chord progression. So I just wanted to touch on chapter 7 in this video as well. This is called Songs, Chords with Charts. Familiar songs can be played from charts with the words added. This is what we were talking about in the last video. Play the 3 songs, Skip to Malou, Amazing Grace, and Scarborough Fair, by strumming once for each beat. Count beats per measure as learned in the previous chapter. Again, whatever the time signature says, I'm counting that number of beats per measure. Sing along after the counting and chord changes become secure. So again, as you're accompanying, you become secure in the pattern that you're playing and the chord progressions that you're playing. After studying rhythmic variety in chapter 8, play these songs again using special strum patterns shown here. So underneath each one, after you've played 1 strum per beat, there are little suggestions. That would be a down, up in 2/4 time. So Skip to Malou, again, for the final exam, might be a progression that you would want to play or choose. 1 and 2, 1 and 2. The chords D and A7, very similar in shape. And 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, and 1, 2. 1 measure each of those. So if I did that was only the first half of the song, the refrain. If I did the strumming pattern that's shown here, it's down, up, down, up, down, up, 2, and 1, and 2, and 1, and 2, 1, and 2, and 1, and 2, 1, and 2, and 1, and 2. Notice at the end, there's 1 measure each of A7 and D. The verse is exactly the same, so I'll just play the refrain there for you. That was Skip to Malou. There's 3 songs in the chapter. Amazing Grace is in 3/4, and this is slightly different than the Hal Leonard book. There's 1 extra chord put in here. This would be 1, 2, 3. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, C. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. And I'll do her special strong pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I did play an extra measure in between those 2 versions. That is a quarter note with a half note. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And Scarborough Fair has 2 patterns. If I play the quarter notes, it's in 3/4 time. A minor, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, G, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, C, 2, 3, A minor, and D, A minor, and A minor, D, G, A minor. Here's the I didn't do the third suggestion, which is just a dotted half note again, which would be holding 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 1. Again, a good way to practice that because you leave the old chord early to get to the new chord on time. Remember, that's a theme of our chord practicing. We want to be changing these chords in rhythm and getting to beat one with a new chord. So keep that in mind as you're practicing those chord progressions. For those of you wondering how I'm doing that down and up strum, I'm almost simulating holding a pick when I'm using my fingers like that. So it's that same idea of the way I would hold a pick, and I'm using my index finger, or even multiple fingers, but my index finger when I go down, okay, and my thumbnail when I go up. So it's just like I was holding a pick, but I'm scraping my fingers against the strings. And that's a very common strumming technique without a pick on nylon or steel string. Again, I could brush my fingers too, almost creating like a snare drum type sound. So there's the 3 tunes for Chapter 7, and at the end of Chapter 7 is a very helpful empty list of chord tablatures. So if you haven't practiced writing these chords in, this is a great place to do that. And there's a little bit of a discussion about trying to memorize the chords alphabetically here. I was getting you to try and memorize them from the E chord bass note, the A chord bass note, and the D chord bass note, and then using some fretted notes after you learn those 9 chords. E, E7, E minor, A7, A minor, D, D7, D minor. Excuse me, she talks about them in alphabetical order here. And that's another way, again, that is helpful for memorizing. So there's a lot of ways to come at this. So suggestions are always welcome, and that's why different teachers have different ideas and different books have different ideas on how to do this. And some may strike you personally when you're studying as clearer or more helpful than others. So try to fill this chart in because I'm going to ask you to do this on the next midterm. So keep that in mind. I'm going to give you a chord name and you have to fill it in. Use the blank tablatures on this page to draw the fingerings for each chord. Write the finger numbers besides each finger dot and use a 0 to show the open strings. Remember, the strings are vertical. Write on the string only, not the fret. On the first test, some people were writing on the frets on those charts that I gave you to fill in the fretboard charts. Use an R. This is important. Use an R to mark the low root string above the nut here and mark an R on the correct root string and play through the list without looking at this page to memorize the fingerings. So work on that. Think about what notes are in the bass and mark those notes. Good luck, and we will see you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.